The
How many
morning in
children do you
Providence
have?
Municipal Court moved with its usual rhythm. Parking violations, expired meters, drivers offering explanations for why they stopped where they shouldn't have. The atmosphere was steady, familiar, almost routine. Then the bailiff called the next case. Mr. Ernesto Ramos. From the gallery, an elderly man rose slowly. His back was slightly hunched, his hands trembling as he clutched a worn cap in front of him. He wore a faded jacket, the kind that looked like it had survived decades of winters, carrying the weight of countless shifts behind the wheel. Each step toward the podium seemed careful, deliberate, as though even walking demanded significant effort. The gallery quieted immediately, their casual chatter fading to complete silence as they watched him make his way forward. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from the file before him, his expression softening instantly. "Good morning, sir." The old man cleared his throat, his voice raspy but polite. "Good morning, Your Honor. Your name is Ernesto Ramos." "Yes, sir." Judge Caprio nodded, glancing at the documents. "Mr. Ramos, you're here on several parking violations, an expired meter, failure to move your vehicle during street cleaning, and late fines for unpaid tickets. The total balance is $190. Do you understand the charges?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ernesto said quietly, adjusting his cap nervously, eyes lowered to the wood grain of the podium. "I understand." Judge Caprio studied him for a moment, noting the deep lines etched across his face, the way age seemed to press down on his shoulders with visible weight. This wasn't just another driver with a meter violation. This man looked tired, not the tired of a long day, but the tired of a long life. "Tell me, sir," Judge Caprio said gently, "do you still drive a taxi?" Ernesto gave a small nod. "Yes, Your Honor. Every day as much as I can." "How long have you been driving?" A faint, bittersweet smile crossed the old man's face. "Since I was 20, almost 50 years now." The gallery shifted. Some leaned in. Others exchanged meaningful looks. 50 years behind the wheel. 50 years of late nights, long shifts, and endless city streets. 50 years of picking up strangers, hearing their stories, delivering them safely to their destinations. Judge Caprio's tone softened further. 50 years is a long time, Mr. Ramos. I imagine you've taken care of a lot of people in that cab." Ernesto's smile faded. He gripped his cap tighter, his knuckles pale against the dark fabric. "Yes, Your Honor. I always took care of people. My family, too. My wife, my children. I worked every day for them, every day." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had lowered to barely above a whisper, trembling with emotion. "But now, there is no one left to take care of me." The words hung in the air. The silence grew heavier, more profound. Something had shifted in the courtroom. What had been routine was suddenly, deeply human. Judge Caprio tilted his head, his expression reflecting both compassion and concern. His voice remained calm, almost fatherly. "Mr. Ramos, tell me a little more about yourself. You've been driving a taxi for 50 years. What's life like for you now?" Ernesto's hands twisted the cap he held, his eyes fixed on it, as though he couldn't bear to look up. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "Life is very hard now, Your Honor. I am old, too old for this work, but I cannot stop. If I stop, I don't eat." A murmur passed through the gallery. People shifted in their seats, glancing at one another, quietly shaken by the bluntness of his words. There was no dramatization, no exaggeration, just raw, honest truth. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his tone even softer. "What about your family, Mr. Ramos? Do you have children? A wife?" At that question, the old man's shoulders sagged even lower. He shook his head slowly, and when he answered, his voice was barely audible. "My wife. She left me, Your Honor. She took the children with her." Judge Caprio's brow furrowed. She left you? Yes, sir, Ernesto whispered. I took care of her my whole life. I worked long hours every day for her and the children. But when I grew too old, when I could not make enough anymore, she said she could not stay. She said she needed someone who could provide, and she left. Took the children. I have not seen them since. The gallery went utterly silent. Even the rustle of papers stopped. The clerk's fingers froze above her keyboard. The bailiff, usually stone-faced, stood a little softer, his eyes downcast. The story was heavy, almost unbearable in its simplicity. Ernesto swallowed hard, his voice trembling. I never thought, after all those years, after everything, that I would be alone like this. I don't blame her. But now I have no one, no family, no one to help me. I am just alone, Your Honor. Judge Caprio's eyes lingered on him, the weight of compassion clear in his expression. His voice carried quietly across the room. Mr. Ramos, you've carried so much. You've given your whole life to others. And now, here you are, standing alone in this courtroom, over $190 in tickets. The judge paused, his gaze moving briefly to the gallery before returning to Ernesto. Sometimes, he added softly, life can be very unfair. The old taxi driver lowered his head, his hands trembling as he clutched his cap. The weight of Ernesto's words settled over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. The usual quiet hum of shuffling papers and whispered conversations had vanished completely. No one moved. No one coughed. People in the gallery sat straighter, their eyes locked on the frail man at the podium. Some looked down at their laps, struggling with the sadness of what they had just heard. Others leaned forward slightly, as if being closer might somehow ease the ache in their chest. A woman in the second row pressed a tissue against her nose, shaking her head slowly. A man in the back folded his arms tight, his jaw clenched, not in anger, but in disbelief that a man who had given his life to work and family could end up abandoned in old age. The silence was thick, but it wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken reactions, sympathy, sorrow, and quiet outrage at the cruelty of Ernesto's situation. At the bench, Judge Caprio remained still, his hand resting over the file. He didn't rush to speak. He let the moment linger, understanding the power of silence, the way it allowed everyone in the room to feel the full depth of what had been said. Ernesto stood hunched at the podium, head lowered, cap clutched tightly in his hands. He wasn't asking for pity. He wasn't even asking for help. He had simply told the truth of his life, and it was heartbreaking enough on its own. Judge Caprio sat back in his chair, his fingers pressed together beneath his chin. The file on Ernesto Ramos sat open before him, but the numbers on the page seemed insignificant compared to the story that had just been laid bare. He looked at the old taxi driver, frail, shoulders stooped, cap trembling in his hands, and for a long moment he said nothing. The silence stretched, not out of hesitation, but out of respect. The gallery watched him closely. They could see it in his face. The judge was weighing more than fines, more than violations. He was weighing a life. Finally, he exhaled softly and spoke, his voice gentle. Mr. Ramos, this court is here to uphold the law. That is my duty. But my duty is also to consider justice, and sometimes justice requires us to see the whole person, not just the ticket. Ernesto lifted his head slightly, his tired eyes meeting the judge's. I want you to know something, Judge Caprio continued. I've seen many cases in this courtroom. People come here angry, careless, sometimes even dishonest. But you, sir, you came here with honesty, with dignity, even in hardship. That matters. The judge glanced at the tickets again, then back at Ernesto. $190. For most people, that's just a number. But for you, Mr. Ramos, it's food, it's shelter, it's survival. He tapped the file lightly with his pen, then set it down, his gaze steady. So, I will take a moment before I rule, because I need to be sure this decision reflects not just the law, but the humanity behind it. The gallery leaned forward, hanging on his words. The bailiff shifted slightly, sensing something unusual in the air. Judge Caprio's voice grew softer, almost reflective. Life is not always fair, Mr. Ramos, and sometimes the law, as it is written, does not capture fairness. But this court will try. The silence deepened once more. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting. But before the gavel could fall, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor broke the stillness. From the back of the courtroom, a figure rose. Every head turned at the sound. From the far corner of the gallery, a man stood up slowly. At first, no one recognized him. He was dressed simply, his hands folded, his posture humble. But as he began walking toward the front, whispers rippled through the room. "Wait, is that—" "No, it can't be. It's Manny Pacquiao." The murmurs grew louder until the name spread across the courtroom like a wave. Manny Pacquiao, the legendary boxer, the senator, the champion of millions, was standing there in Judge Caprio's courtroom. No entourage, no cameras, no flash. Just Manny himself, who had been blending into the crowd until this moment. He stopped a few feet from the podium, bowing his head respectfully toward the bench. "Your Honor," he said in a calm, steady voice. "May I speak?" The gallery went silent again, all eyes darting between Judge Caprio and the world-famous man now standing in the middle of a Providence traffic court. Judge Caprio blinked, clearly surprised. "Mr. Pacquiao, this is unexpected. You may speak," Manny nodded, his gaze shifting toward Ernesto Ramos. When he spoke, his voice carried warmth, but also a firmness born of lived experience. "I know what it feels like to be poor. I know what it feels like to work every day and still struggle. And I know what it feels like to be left alone when you need people the most." Ernesto turned slowly, eyes widening in disbelief as he realized who was speaking to him. His lips parted, but no words came. Manny stepped closer to the podium, his tone steady, compassionate. This man has carried his family, his work, his whole life on his shoulders. And now he stands here alone, over tickets he cannot pay. That should not be his burden. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. "Your Honor, with your permission, I would like to pay this man's fine, today, in full." A collective gasp swept the gallery. Some covered their mouths. Others exchanged stunned looks. The quiet heaviness of sorrow had been pierced by something new. Awe. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, the faintest trace of a smile touching his lips. "Mr. Pacquiao, this is highly unusual, but your offer is extraordinary." Manny bowed his head respectfully. "It is not extraordinary, Your Honor. It is only right. A man like this deserves help, not punishment." The gallery erupted in soft applause, quickly hushed by the bailiff's raised hand. But the admiration lingered in their faces, in the quiet nods of approval that passed through the room. For Ernesto, the moment was overwhelming. His hands shook harder, his eyes welling with tears, as he stared at the man beside him. The man, who had fought for world titles, was now fighting for him. Manny Pacquiao turned fully toward the bench, his voice calm but carrying the weight of experience. "Your Honor," he began, "I was once a boy with nothing. I sold bread on the streets. I went hungry many nights. I fought not because I wanted to be famous, but because my family needed to eat. I know what it is to be forgotten, to be overlooked, to feel like the world has moved on without you." The gallery listened in rapt silence, drawn in by the humility of his words. This was not the Pacquiao of bright lights and roaring arenas. This was a man remembering the dirt roads of his childhood, speaking as one survivor to another. He turned to Ernesto, his voice softening. "Sir, I see myself in you. You gave your life to your family. You worked when you were young, and now you are still working when you should be resting. And instead of gratitude, you were left behind." "That is not right." Ernesto's lips trembled. His weathered face showed pure disbelief. He whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "I never thought anyone would stand for me." Manny shook his head gently. "No man should be left to stand alone, not after a lifetime of sacrifice. That is why I cannot sit quietly while you are punished for simply being poor and old. I will pay your fine today, Mr. Ramos. And I will pray that one day your children understand the man you truly are." The words landed with heavy stillness. A woman in the gallery dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The bailiff shifted slightly, his gaze softening despite his professional demeanor. Judge Caprio looked at Manny Pacquiao for a long moment, his expression a mixture of surprise, admiration, and quiet respect. "Mr. Pacquiao," Judge Caprio said, finally, "what you've said and what you are offering to do speaks more loudly than any title belt, any championship, or any speech you could give." The old taxi driver's head lowered, tears sliding down his cheeks. He clutched his cap tightly against his chest, as though holding himself together. "I don't deserve this," Ernesto whispered. Manny placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You deserve more than this, much more." The gallery sat in stunned reverence, realizing they had just witnessed something that would never leave their memories. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his eyes shifting between Ernesto Ramos and Manny Pacquiao. The file of violations sat forgotten on the bench. What mattered now was not numbers or codes, but what had just unfolded in his courtroom. He spoke slowly, his voice carrying both warmth and authority. "Mr. Pacquiao, I have presided over thousands of cases in this chamber. I have seen anger, defiance, and countless excuses. But today, I have seen something different. Today I have seen compassion, humility, and from a man who, by all accounts, has no obligation to be here at all." The gallery listened in rapt silence, their faces reflecting the same respect conveyed in the judge's words. Judge Caprio turned his attention fully to Manny. "You are a world champion, admired by millions. Yet in this moment you have reminded us all that greatness is not measured only by victories in the ring or by titles held. True greatness is measured by the way we treat those who have nothing, by the way we choose to lift others up when they cannot stand alone." Manny bowed his head slightly, his humility plain to see. The judge then looked at Ernesto, his expression soft. "Mr. Ramos, the law required you to answer for these tickets. But today, justice requires something more. Justice requires mercy. And thanks to Mr. Pacquiao's generosity, your fines will be paid in full." Ernesto gasped softly, his knees weakening. He gripped the podium for balance, his cap pressed tightly to his chest. Judge Caprio's voice gentled further. "You are not forgotten, Mr. Ramos. Not in this courtroom, and not in life. You've carried others for decades. Today, someone has carried you." The old man lowered his head, tears spilling freely now, his shoulders trembling with quiet sobs. The gallery stirred, not with raucous applause, but with something far more respectful, a ripple of nods. A few whispered, "Amen," and a soft, collective acknowledgement that they had just witnessed something rare. Judge Caprio lifted his gavel, but before striking it, he added one last line. "This case is dismissed, not by the letter of the law, but by the spirit of humanity. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a firm, final crack. Ernesto Ramos stood at the podium, his cap clutched against his chest, his frail hands trembling so badly he could barely hold it steady. For a moment, he could not speak. The weight of what had just happened, what had been lifted from his shoulders, was too overwhelming. Finally, his voice came, broken and unsteady. Your Honor, Mr. Pacquiao, I don't know how to thank you. All my life I gave everything I had, and when I thought there was nothing left for me, when I thought I was finished, today you showed me that I was wrong, that there is still kindness in this world. He turned his gaze to Manny, eyes wet with tears. I know who you are. The whole world knows. But to me, you are not a champion because of boxing. You are a champion because you remembered an old man when no one else did. Manny smiled softly, bowing his head in humility. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The hand he placed gently over his heart said more than words ever could. Ernesto looked back at Judge Caprio, his voice trembling again. And you, Your Honor, you listened. You cared. You didn't treat me like a number on paper. For that, I will never forget you. The gallery, moved but respectful, responded not with loud applause but with something deeper. Quiet nods, soft murmurs of approval, the subtle sound of tissues brushing against cheeks. It was a collective acknowledgement of the moment, sacred in its simplicity. Slowly, Ernesto straightened his frail frame. He bowed deeply, first to Judge Caprio, then to Manny Pacquiao. Before shuffling back to his seat, the weight that had once bent his shoulders seemed lighter now, as if for the first time in years. He wasn't carrying it all alone. What happened in that Providence courtroom didn't end when Ernesto walked out the door. The video of the proceedings, shared across social media platforms, was viewed millions of times within days. People from around the world commented on the moment, not just the celebrity appearance, but the deeper truth it revealed about compassion, dignity, and what we owe to those who have given everything. Taxi drivers in cities across America shared the video in their break rooms, many seeing their own futures reflected in Ernesto's weathered face. Some started informal assistance funds for retired drivers who had fallen on hard times. Boxing fans, already devoted to Pacquiao, found new reasons to admire him. This wasn't a photo opportunity or a publicity stunt. It was an authentic act of recognition from one person who had struggled to another still struggling. For Judge Caprio, the case became another example of what his courtroom had always represented, a place where the letter of the law met the spirit of justice, where human dignity mattered as much as legal precedent. The story of Ernesto Ramos and Manny Pacquiao resonated because it touched something fundamental about human experience. It showed us that after a lifetime of work and sacrifice, we all hope that someone will remember, that someone will care, that we won't be left to face our hardest moments alone. Ernesto had driven that taxi for 50 years. He had picked up thousands of passengers, heard countless stories, delivered people safely to their destinations day after day, night after night. He had provided for his family, fulfilled his responsibilities, played by the rules. And when age and circumstance left him vulnerable, when the people he had cared for were gone, he found himself in a courtroom over 190, an amount that represented days of work at his age that could mean the difference between eating and going hungry. But he also found something else in that courtroom: recognition of his humanity, acknowledgement of his sacrifice, and tangible help from someone who understood what it meant to struggle. Manny Pacquiao's gesture wasn't just about paying a fine. It was about seeing another human being, recognizing shared experience, and refusing to let someone face hardship alone when you have the power to help. Judge Caprio's handling of the case wasn't just about legal discretion. It was about understanding that justice without mercy is incomplete, that the law exists to serve human needs, not to crush those already struggling. In the end, what happened in that courtroom was both extraordinary and simple. It was extraordinary because it involved a world champion stepping forward in humility. It was simple because it demonstrated a truth we all understand. No one should have to face their hardest moments alone. Ernesto Ramos gave 50 years to his work and his family. When he needed someone to stand with him, Manny Pacquiao and Judge Caprio showed him that his life and his sacrifice mattered. That's the kind of justice that transcends legal codes and courtroom procedures. It's the kind of justice that recognizes our shared humanity and refuses to let technicalities override compassion. As Ernesto walked out of that courtroom, no longer burdened by fines he couldn't pay, he carried something more valuable than financial relief. He carried the knowledge that he had been seen, heard, and valued. That, after a lifetime of taking care of others, someone had finally taken care of him. And perhaps that's the most important verdict any court can deliver.